Hi, I'm John Mark. Welcome to the Beaten Zone. This podcast is about war, not from the top down, but from the ground up. It's about unearthing personal truths of war, its lessons, costs, and how it shapes the lives of the people who experienced it firsthand. In every unit, there's a guy or gal so switched on to the world around them, so well read, so in tune with the hidden realities of what the rest of us are experiencing, they kind of seem out of place. They are complicated souls. They are, in the words of Chris Christopherson, walking contradictions, partly truth and partly fiction. But in that way, they are the perfect reflection of the places in which we served. And that is why guys like our guests are so important. We are deeply honored to welcome Ben Sledge, a veteran of wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. He's also the author of the critically acclaimed book, Where Cowards Go to Die. This book stopped me in my tracks. It's one of the rawest, most provocative descriptions of life in combat in Iraq and Afghanistan. But this book goes well beyond a great story about war. Ben gives readers a vivid and uncompromising look into his life after combat, one marked by crisis, addiction, and a complicated search for purpose outside of the Army. But it's also a story of faith, healing, and the blessings of service to others. Chapter 31 of this book might be the best chapter I've ever read. I highly recommend his book for anyone interested in the realities of war and the tough journey many combat veterans must make after their service is complete. This book is not for the faint of heart, but it's perfect for anyone genuinely searching for meaning in their lives. And now, veteran, author, and metalhead, Ben Sledge.
All right, Ben, it's great to have you here, brother. Been looking forward to this for a long time.
Me too. I mean, we've been planning this for like 2 months now, or about.
Yeah, and thanks to Steve for introducing us. Good guy,
Yeah.
and
Mhm.
I'm looking forward to this. So, Ben, I gotta tell you, man, like when I got your book, the title "Where Cowards Go to Die," it stopped me in my tracks. It's a very provocative title, and so what's the story behind that, and like where does cowardice mean in the context of war and recovery?
I mean, you're gonna have to read the book to understand. I'm not gonna give away the ending, man. You know, I'm not gonna do that. But to give kind of a timeline of things, I'll tell you where I got the title from. I was actually in Iraq. I was in Ramadi at the time. And when you're overseas and you're not doing missions, there's just a ton of time to read or watch TV. And so I was reading a ton, and that's how I just reinvigorated my love for reading was while I was overseas.
Mhm.
And I picked up this book. It was an old book from like the 1950s called I Am Legend. And a lot of people know it from, the Will Smith movie, which has literally nothing to do with the book. Like it's about like weird zombies in that film. In I Am Legend, it's actually a vampire novel, and it influenced like Stephen King and a lot of these big horror writers. And it deals a lot with like isolation and solitude and the human condition. But you figure out at the end of the book, the last 3 words of the book are I am legend. And you figure out why the book is called that. And literally I had this thought while I was in Ramadi. I was like, if I ever write a book, I'm going to do the same thing as this guy because that was epic. And so that's what I did. So the this story though, in my own personal stories, I think in a lot of our lives, we tend to be heroes or monsters. I think we can be heroic or cowards. And for me, you throughout your life, there are moments where you're going to give it into cowardice. There's moments where you have to put down that cowardice. There's moments where you act heroic, not even intending to. And there's this thread that runs through everybody's life. And I wanted to show snapshots of that throughout my childhood, throughout my teenage years, throughout my time in the military and afterwards. And that's really where the title kind of developed from.
Folks, it's a very provocative book, and I can't recommend it enough. We're going to reference it many times throughout today's conversation, but that's my plug. It's a great book. You got to check it out. Now, in the book, and then also over the course of our conversations, you've kind of described our generation. You and I
Mhm.
are about the same age, as one that's sort of challenged when it comes to purpose. Yet, for you, service gave you a sense of purpose, meaning, and direction. Why do you think that like purpose is so elusive for so many people outside the military or even for veterans who leave the military?
Right. So one of the things that I've noticed is, so I have two kids, and one of the things that's really interesting is after President Bush passed the No Child Left Behind Act, the United States really began the education system really began to focus on standardized testing. So your three big core things are, math, science, and reading. And all of a sudden, like, the humanities went to the wayside, like social
Mhm.
studies, art, music, even PE, physical education. And even my kids, they try and do that, and they're in a really good school district, but they have to have the parent teacher organization pay for the salaries of, like, the art teacher and the librarian and things like that. But they only get a little bit of time, like, I think it's like once a week with like an art teacher, and that's only for one semester. And then it will switch over to like music for the following semester, and they only get like an hour a week for that. Whereas like you and I growing up, and most of us growing up, remember those moments we were in all of those classes. I remember my
Mhm.
art teacher, I remember my PE teacher, I remember my music teacher, and I would go every day. And so what's happened is with the removal of social studies and studying history and philosophy and art, things that we just inherently make as human beings, you would wrestle with your purpose and identity. Like, what am I here on this earth for? Like, and all of those, art, music, philosophy, history, could really help you figure out those answers. And suddenly you've removed those from the educational school system, and and then replaced it with social media, where they call it like AI slop. We're all just like watching the same videos over and over. It's not educating us, it's not informing us, it's entertaining us to death. And we go, why do I feel awful about myself? Well, it's because we're not wrestling through any of those questions anymore that we once had to. What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to have purpose, meaning, and direction? And so out of that, I've really seen that when you join the military, there you get this inherent sense of purpose, meaning, direction, camaraderie, brotherhood, sisterhood with the people around you. They have your back, you watch their back. And then when you get out of the military, you end up in a corporate environment where none of those values exist anymore. Where you have to embrace team, specifically in the military. You have to kill individual ideology and embrace the unit cohesion. So you get out of the military, and suddenly everybody at your job is trampling over each other to get ahead in their next career step. They'll stab each other in the back. And that was something that was really jarring for me when I got out of the military. I was like, why is everybody like kind of like being subversively like stabbing each other in the back with, I thought we were all supposed to be friends and coworkers. And
Mhm.
then your boss is trying to create profits for his shareholders. He doesn't really care about you. You're a number. Whereas, within the military, you have your team sergeants, you have your company commanders, all the way up to your generals. And we have this motto, leaders eat last. And so men and women get out of the military, and suddenly they don't have that anymore. And it's a loss of meaning, purpose, and direction. And they really just have to find that again. And I think the real key for our generation, this day and age, is, are you surrounding yourself with people that are pushing you toward a purpose, a direction, meaning, some type of faith affiliation, or are you endlessly entertaining yourself to death? And I think if you do the latter, that's what you're really seeing in our society, and why it's become such a huge problem.
That's a really interesting point. I mean, I was speaking to a friend of mine the other day who was a recruiter at one point, and we were talking about like how much different recruiting was back during the GWAT times. After the
Hmm.
towers went down, you had all that was going on in society, drawing a lot of folks to want to come in. We were just thinking about like the challenges that a recruiter today would have, right? You have lives that have been largely shaped by social media,
Hmm.
by a different set of values. I don't mean to say that like the young generation sucks. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm
No.
saying though is a reality though is like the things that shaped you and me when we were kids, in the early '90s, right? Versus the things that shape kids today. Think about how much different the world was when you first came in when there was no social media versus the way it is today in our lifetime, a fraction of our lifetimes.
My first deployment, social media didn't exist, which is wild to think about. You know, I was just out on this forward operating base, and I couldn't even email home. I was in such a remote area that we had to use satellite phones once a week to call
Yep.
home.
Yeah, big deal. And then I remember we actually had like Facebook, like there were all these rules about the use of Facebook on the base, and you know, it was just now like connect. I can only imagine like the cognitive dissonance that would occur if you pulled a soldier's phone from him or her because you're getting ready to go into operations and you're trying to do OPSEC like that. That's a big deal. So that's awesome. Now you mentioned before, and again, everything you say is very provocative and gets me thinking. It's a good thing. You said before,
Provocative. Every time you say that, I think of, what is it, Wedding Crashers, or is like, it's provocative and violent, you know?
Well, I was talking to someone last a couple days ago about art, and I made the point that like the whole point of like art is to provoke. Well, brother, you got it, man. You nailed it, and it's a good thing. You said before that soldiers can play God, that they can raise up countries or destroy them. Can you help us unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, I had read this book prior to writing mine, and it was actually during the process of writing it. It's by a Vietnam veteran named Carl Marlantis. And Carl, excuse me, I've got a frog in my throat for some reason. Carl is a Vietnam veteran who won the Navy Cross, and he wrote this book called Matterhorn, which became a New York Times bestseller. And then he wrote this follow-up book, which is just nonfiction, called What It's Like to Go to War. And he brings up the point that we like to think about, you know, spiritual spaces being sacred and nonviolent, right? And he said, but would anybody say that Calvary Hill is not nonviolent? You know, like where Jesus dies on the cross and stuff. And he goes, and yet we consider it a sacred space. And he said, and so he brought up the point that war is very spiritual in nature. And so for me, I kind of took that a little bit further, and I was like, I realized, like, when you're in war, it is an actually very spiritual experience for a lot of people, because it is like playing God. You have the power to protect life or the power to take it away. And so you're protecting civilians, and then, you know, you're punishing the bad guys, or you're shooting at insurgencies or another human being who just might be in the wrong place at the wrong time, wrong upbringing, and they decide to you know, follow the path of you know, the Taliban or Al Qaeda or whatever they grew up doing. No fault of their own, per se. But the thing that I discovered is like, there is no formative consensus like on what happens when we die, just from a purely logical perspective. So like for me, I think with, you know, 100% certainty, I know what happens when we die. But that's my perspective. That is not a formative human being consensus. Some people think, you know, it's heaven. Some people think it's reincarnation. Some people think, you know, it's the great nothingness. But what happens when you put an M4 carbine rifle at a man and you pull the trigger is you send him to the great unknown, that area that we're like, we don't know what happens after we die. And there's something deeply spiritual about that. And so when we say that war is not this spiritual experience and we're playing God to some degree, you really miss out, especially like clinicians do, on helping combat veterans and veterans understand like that spiritual aspect and nature of war. So for me, I didn't really think much about it until I got home, and I was like, why is my soul so jacked up from what I did? Like, this shouldn't bother me, but it bugs me infinitely. And I was just looking at it from a logical perspective, and then I had to really see it from the spiritual perspective to go, oh, there is something deeply innate to this experience that I am just brushing to the side.
Yeah. See, and that's an important point, man. And I think that like when a lot of people hear things, like particularly among fellow veterans, we hear things like war is spiritual, right? A lot of people like immediately like discount it as like some kind of like self-indulgent kind of like, you know, blues jam, but it's not. what you just said was the key, is that, yes, when you go off and you fight a war and then you come back home, okay, they're called invisible wounds of war for a reason, is because they are deeply personal. They're deeply spiritual. And how we treat those wounds of war is not something that, it's not like a car, right? Right. And so, I mean, I think it's a very important point. And before people who are listening say, oh, that sounds like hippie stuff, give it some real critical thought. And we're going to tease this out because I think these are important points that you're bringing up. But before we do that, now that we've kind of got to know a little bit about you, we're going to turn back the clock a little bit, and we're going to go to the beginning. And then I guess my question is, like, what drew you to enlist? What brought you into the Army from Oklahoma?
So, growing up in like the 80s and 90s, you had those awesome recruiting commercials, the be all you can be one is like, we get more done, before like 8 a.m. than most of the world does, and the Army's like, yeah. And it's like Rangers jumping out of planes and you're like, that's cool. And then the Marine Corps had to like one up us and they're like, we fight fire demons, like, what in the hell? And so, back in the 80s and 90s, like all of our rooms were plastered with posters. Like I remember I had Trans Am posters. I had my Army poster. I had my Marine Corps poster. You have your Budweiser girls poster. Like that was just the time period of the day and age that we grew up in. And so it was considered this very honorable thing, especially after what had happened to our Vietnam veterans that came home, were spit on, ostracized, and they just packed that away. And it wasn't until the populace realized, like, oh my gosh, we did them such a disservice, that it once again became like kind of like, oh wow, they do protect us, they do keep us safe, so that we don't have to go over and do the horrible things that they do. And my family had come from a very long lineage of military history, and it goes back. I recently found out I'm related to E.B. Sledge, who wrote With the Old Breed, which is like one of the most iconic books to ever come out of the military, which became the basis for the Pacific, as far as the HBO miniseries. And the Sledges all came from one guy in England named Thomas Sledge. And then from there, his sons, Daniel Sledge and John Sledge, were captains in the American Revolutionary War who fought, for the Americans, for independence and freedom. And then their 7 sons fought underneath them. And then from there, it just trickled all out. So on the Sledge side, my grandfather served during World War II, but he stayed stateside because they figured out he could type. So he stayed at Fort Bliss. But my great uncle, his brother, stormed the beaches in the Pacific. And there's this funny story that my dad told me about him. He was like, yeah, he was like, your grandfather one day asked his brother, like, hey, weren't you scared to like storm those beaches? And he was like, how'd you keep from getting shot? And he goes, I ran faster than the bullets did. So I have this history, on the Sledge side with all of that. And then on my mom's side, same thing. We go back as far as a general under Napoleon. And my grandfather was a paratrooper with the 82nd Airborne during World War II. Who inevitably ended up getting transferred to Patton's 3rd ID because he missed the D-Day jump because he caught pneumonia. So he got transferred to Germany to Patton's 3rd ID and became a Scotch supplier when him and his buddy hijacked a mortuary affairs vehicle and filled it to the brim with Johnny Walker Red. And that story's in my book, and it's more fleshed out and everything. But I came from this like really long lineage of military history. And originally I wanted to join the Marines, and the Marine recruiters came over and scared the crap out of my parents. And the big reason that I was going to join the military is both my parents had been to college, and we were kind of more lower middle class. My mom stayed at home. My dad worked in a hospital, and we had enough to get by. But they went into a lot of debt to just provide for me and my brother. So out of that, they were like, you got to go to college. We can't pay for it. What are you going to do? I was like, I guess we're joining the military because that's what the men in this family do. And so the Marines came over, scared my parents. It's 1999. And I'm like, okay, well, whatever. There's no wartime stuff going on. Bill Clinton's maybe got a few people over in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So big whoop. Never thinking that anything's going to happen. And so my grandfather starts to play an influence, and he's like, you should join the army following the family footsteps. And I was like, that's okay. And there was a lot of options. Like the Marines have more limited options, whereas the Army has just a very broad variety of different jobs you can have. But I met this recruiter in my hometown who's like, hey, have you ever considered joining the reserves and doing Army Special Operations? And I was like, what? They have that? And he's like, yeah, you learn like things like languages and diplomacy, and I was like, well, this would look really good for a college resume and be good to advance my career. And so I heard about civil affairs and psychological operations command. I was like, well, civil affairs sounds great for me.
Mhm.
And my parents wanted me to be like a mail clerk or a quartermaster or something. They were like, pick just a real mundane job and be safe in the military. But I scored high enough on my ASVAB, the aptitude test, that I got the CA slot. And so I was like, yeah, I'm going to do that. I didn't even know what special operations was. I just thought it sounded cool. So I, on December 19th, 1999, I went to MEPS and put up my hand and swore an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States and joined as PV1, a private.
That's awesome, man. And for the folks at home who may be not familiar with civil affairs, can you give us a brief kind of like run over? What's the purpose of civil affairs? Like what do you do in a war situation?
Yeah, a lot of people completely misunderstand what we do. They just think it's, hugs and handing out soccer balls and all this other goofy stuff. And that is not the case by any means. In fact, the way that civil affairs and also psychological operations were created was during Vietnam, out of a need that Green Berets had for minimizing civilian interference on the battlefield. And so what they realize is like, if we can, win the hearts and minds of the populace and minimize civilian casualties, then we have a better chance of letting, infantry line units and special operations forces do their job. And so what happens was civil affairs just basically became, the way that I like to describe it, is geopolitical experts. And geopolitics is just a large word that means the study of, history, background, occasion, demography, which is your population bell curves, the things that have happened in the past for area, the study of how that geography and natural barriers will dictate foreign policy, aspects of diplomacy, reconstruction efforts. That's what most of them think of. But it's minimizing that civilian interference on the battlefield. And so for me, it's learning the customs and the cultures and the languages so that you can build those rapport and those relationships, gather intelligence on the battlefield, and then at the same time win the hearts and minds of the local populace to win the war effort. Because the last thing that you want to have happening is you're just completely leveling a city and everybody's pissed off, and you're going to just create more insurgents. You're going to create more foreign fighters. And as we've seen, sadly, with like everything that has gone on with Israel and Gaza, like they did not win the hearts and minds of the populace. They didn't have a CA team to really deal with that. Whereas like in war, like we would have like the civilians protest at the front gate when like a civilian got killed or something of that nature happened. And so we would handle a lot of the local populace and also at the same time, the clearing operation. So you have a large scale clearing operation. You have to have civil affairs guys because we're the ones with all the interpreters. We're outside the wire every single day interacting with the local populace. We know like this guy's a bad guy, this guy's dirty, this guy's a tribal warlord that we need to interact with to advance the goals and means of the commander's intent on the battle space. And out of that, I like to tell people you either make a lot of friends or you get shot at a lot. So that's in a nutshell, very simply put, the CA mission.
Yeah, and for the folks who aren't familiar, if you think what he said sounds like you're the kind of person that sits around in the headquarters all day drinking coffee, you'd be wrong. The whole your experience as told in the book was quite different. You probably went outside the wire, went out into the population more than a lot of people in operational units did. I mean, it sounded like you almost lived outside the wire during your two deployments.
I did. And that was the weird thing. I was on a podcast recently, and the guy asked me. He said, "How many days do you think you spent outside the wire between your two deployments?" And I said, "Probably 500 days," which at the time I didn't think anything of it. Like, I was just doing my job, man. I thought that was totally normal. And come to find out, like, infantry guys didn't spend nearly that time outside the wire. So if you were on a civil affairs team alpha, you were constantly outside the wire. I mean, we would literally load up that morning, and regardless of what team was going out, they needed us. And so we were there nonstop. It is not sitting in a base. It depends on what you're doing. Obviously, there's always headquarters elements and whatnot, but we were just gone. I didn't think twice about it. And now I'm like, I literally got a text message from two of the Marine Corps civil affairs guys that I was with in Ramadi. And they said, you brought up a really good point that, like, I've never considered just how much we went outside the wire and just exactly how dangerous that was compared to what everybody else was doing. And I was like, I really picked the wrong job that my parents did not want me to go into.
Yeah, sounds like it.
Mhm.
Now, you had two combat tours.
Mhm.
One in Afghanistan in the early days,
Yeah.
in Eastern Afghanistan, and you talk extensively about that in your book. And you also were in Anbar province in Western Iraq, which is kind of during that time was about as bad as it got during that time.
Was.
Um, so what were I guess let's start with like Afghanistan. Just briefly tell us what your team's mission was, who you were supporting, and kind of general things that you did while you were there.
So the early mission, you got to remember. So this is fresh after 9/11. You know, we get the Special Operations Forces into Afghanistan roughly October 2001, and then you have Operation Anaconda and Tora Bora and kind of like that stuff, and Taliban Last Stand at Kandahar Airfield, and then more of your kind of conventional forces and everybody else comes in. But the problem was, all of a sudden we're invading Iraq too by early 2003, and I had gone through. I had to finish my training. So I had to do the John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Center in school at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. I had to pick another language, which the funny part is we were aligned with the Southern Command. And I was like, well, I want, Pashtun or Dari or Arabic or something that's going to help me out in this. And they're like, nah, dog, you're still aligned with Southcom. So you get a choice of Spanish, French, or Portuguese. And I was like, I guess I'm choosing Spanish because that's going to help me out most in the long run. So I literally graduate from Defense Language Institute, fluent in Spanish. 3 months later, I get orders for Afghanistan. And I'm like, this was not helpful, guys. So that's 2003. That's around May 2003 when we start training up and to head over. And so out of that, we get there, and we're still trying to figure it all out. At this point, we've kind of crushed the Taliban, but now you kind of have them doing cross-border operations. We're still on the hunt for Osama bin Laden. The Al-Qaeda is coming in and causing chaos. The Chechens are too, that are aligned with Al-Qaeda. And so we went into this area and started, same thing, as far as like the commander's intent is to establish rapport with the local populace. We're building girls' schools for the first time, like in that area, gathering intelligence, working with the local warlords and the mullahs to further the commander's intent of the area, and winning the hearts and minds of the populace and minimizing that civilian interference on the battlefield. And so we were out doing all of those things. So I would say, honestly, the reconstruction efforts, there just wasn't a need during that time period, because everything in Afghanistan, you have to remember, is very tribal. Now, if we were in Bagram or Kandahar, that different story. But the reality of the situation was I was out on the border where a lot of the fighting was. And so my job was to work with the local indigenous populations And so our big projects really were just building schools for girls in the area, but that wasn't our focus.
Mhm.
Our focus was the populace in Orkney, the populace in Shkin, going out with infantry line units to minimize collateral damage and everything else that was ongoing. Afghanistan was also the most heavily mined country on earth due to the Soviet-Afghan War. And
Mhm.
so we had to deal a lot. We even had one guy on our team back in Kandahar who had to work a lot in the morgue with like the civilian populace because people were constantly getting blown up or there were, um, firefights and different things that went on where, or airstrikes that left people that killed people. And so dealing with some of that as well too was within the realm of what we were doing to ensure that people that were killed in like other provinces or that the Taliban or Al Qaeda members had captured and killed, to return those bodies to their family. And again, that's another way of just establishing rapport with the local populace, saying, "Hey, look, we're not against you. These are the people that have done this stuff. We're trying to help you out." And so
Yeah.
they were always very appreciative of that. So that was really kind of the Afghanistan mission, whereas Iraq is more urban,
Mhm.
and a lot more intense because of that.
Before we pivot to Iraq, I wanted to ask you, while you were on the ground, do you see reason to be hopeful about the future, or did you see us planting seeds of disaster in the future? Or maybe it wasn't that clear.
It was a little bit of both end. I was young and idealistic. I was 21 at the time. 9/11 was a fresh wound. And
Mhm.
so, American hubris at the time was we're going to go in and bring them democracy, which is
Mhm.
what we did for both. And they did not want that. They
Mhm.
wanted to be ruled by either Sharia law or some combination of the two. And the thing that you have to remember about Afghanistan is they didn't really mind the Taliban as long as the Taliban left them alone. Most of the areas were controlled in the provinces of Afghanistan were controlled by either a local warlord or a mullah or whoever it was in the area. And as long as they were kind of live and let live, they were okay with that. There was not really a lot of progress. Like everything in Afghanistan, especially in the tribal areas, looked like progress had stopped like in the 1500s. They're still living in mud huts. It's well water. A lot of it's growing opium and poppy and hash for to be sold to the Silk Road. It's a herdsman lifestyle as opposed to urban and modern. So they when I went in there, I was hopeful about this. I was hopeful about girls finally getting an education and going, oh, this is something that they deserve and something that they need. And they really didn't want that though. And I was hopeful about progress made, but the more that I kind of just got into my time over there, I was like, I begin to see like they're not really into this.
Mhm.
Um, and so, I left the country hopeful that I had made a difference. But as I watched it, over the years, I realized we just really don't know what we're doing there. And we're and I mean, what did we accomplish really in 20 years of war? And like, it's a question I think many of us have asked. Like, look at who's back in power. And Afghanistan now on like the happiness scale is like the worst place you could possibly live.
Yeah.
So, we gave them these freedoms and these livelihoods. And I've talked to a couple interpreters in my local area and they're like, yeah, the tough part is like you gave us like 20 years basically to stand up an army and fight back. And when the time came, we just rolled over. He said, you raised us up to be adults and send us out on our own. And then when the time came, we just we said, no, we're not going to do that. And
Mhm.
again, I think it went back to what I saw early on. It's they just wanted to be left alone. They wanted to continue on in their lives. And I think the places that were really, really affected were the big metropolitan centers like Bagram and Kandahar. So
Mhm. Yeah, that's a common theme, Ben, from all of our guests who spent time in Afghanistan is, you know, the hear it constantly, the whole thing about folks didn't really want democracy, they wanted justice, they wanted security. I guess we'll pivot, now to Anbar. Now, if my history is correct, when you got the Anbar province, you were that. I mean, it was a shooting hot war there. They call
Oh
it the
yeah,
Battle of Ramadi for a reason, right?
yeah,
But it was also a very pivotal time. A lot of strategic events happened in Anbar during that time, and civil affairs played a huge role in that. So, is that a
right.
correct characterization of the environment in which you and your team found yourself in?
That is a correct characterization. So in 2006, you had the beginning of the surge where President Bush and the generals were like, and Dick Cheney and all those guys were like, all right, we got to stop the insurgency, and we had just founded counterinsurgency coin, which
Mhm.
became the strategy of winning the war effort. But where we were at Ramadi, so a little history lesson. Initially, you had all your enemy fighters concentrated in Fallujah in 2004. So you had Operation Phantom Fury. But what people don't know, and Bing West's book kind of talks about this, and there's another new one that just came out about Echo Company 2-4. I think it's called Unremitting, where in tandem at the same time, there was a initial battle early on in Ramadi in 2004. So there was two tandem battles that were going on for like the heart, and they were just violent areas. So General Mattis comes in, he squashes all of Fallujah. All the foreign fighters go, well, we're going to go over to Ramadi, and that's when it becomes the epicenter of hell. So from 2006 to 2007, half of all daily attacks that happen in the entire country of Iraq happen in Ramadi, Iraq.
Mhm.
So imagine that, half of all daily attacks coming from one city. Half of all deaths for the United States Marine Corps from 2006 to 2007 happened in Ramadi. And the rules of engagement were so fast and loose that, and I mean, I was literally with one of the commanders of the Marines that I was with on a clearing operation. And I was like, surely this wasn't the case. Cause like sometimes you live through this stuff and you're like, that didn't really happen. My brain's making that up. And then you talk to other people who were there and you're like, it was true. That's nuts.
Mhm.
So the rules of engagement were this: if they had a shovel, you could shoot them. If they peeked twice, you could shoot them. If they had a cell phone, you could shoot them. So it like positive identification really just wasn't a thing because it was the wild, wild west. And you
And I'm
just,
sorry, Ben, I don't mean to cut you off. Just for the folks who may not be familiar, and why a shovel, cell phone, and pickaxe? Why was
uh,
that?
IEDs. They were calling in IEDs. The cell phone was to trigger an IED, and shovels they were digging IEDs
Yeah,
and pickaxe and all of that.
sorry. Yeah, just want to
So
make sure
sorry,
folks know.
that's a great clarification. So
And
yeah, and if they're
I'm not litigating that, by the way. I just want to make sure they can understand. That's
yeah,
those kinds of rules of engagements are very much debatable.
right.
But I want to make sure that folks understood the logic behind that. So please continue.
Yeah, I mean things were so hot. General Mattis came to visit us, and so I have a photo with him, and he's asking about what's going on. He decides to go outside the wire, and Colonel McFarland tells him, "Hey, this is a really bad idea." And he's like, "Oh, I got my own personal security details, about 70 Marines." Guess what happens to General Mattis when he decides to go down to the government center? He gets pinned. His guys can't get out because they're under such heavy fire. They have to send 2 Army tankers to rescue them. That's
Wow.
how intense the area was. And I mean, it was no joke. Just kind of in that area, it was the hotbed of the insurgency. It's where everybody wanted to make a stand. And there were aspects of the city that we did not even control. There was an area over near this place called Eagle's Nest, and it was out near the Malab district, and it worked kind of like a demarcation zone, like you would see like the DMZ or things you heard about in Vietnam, where it's like, oh, enemy controlled this space. And we like to think that Americans had entire control over the battle space. We did not during that time period. We couldn't venture past a certain point, otherwise you'd be shot dead by snipers. And
Mhm.
so it wasn't until Operation Murphy's Row in early 2007 where we went in and cleared that, and we took heavy casualties because of it.
Indeed. And that really marked a turning point, I think, in terms of the types of tactics, right? Because my understanding is that's when the Ready First Brigade and the Marines kind of got off the fob and they pushed out into sector and they stayed there, right? The combat
Correct.
outpost. Yeah. And that's that was very dangerous. That's a very high risk
And
operation.
what really caused a thriving insurgency, and this is where my job came into play, and people forget, like, one of the biggest issues I had during the GWAT was that I would have infantry line unit commanders come in and say, "Oh, I can do your job," and I'm like, that's like a plumber telling a graphic designer that he can build a website. That's just absurd. It's silly.
Right.
And they're like, what we're going to do is we're going to build soccer fields because Iraqis love soccer fields. Like, and they would just do dumb stuff in Ramadi sometimes. They painted the water tower like a soccer ball because they thought that the Iraqis would like that, which is the stupidest thing you could possibly spend American taxpayer. There was so much fraud, waste, and abuse. And we had a guy that I believe he's a Cherokee Indian. His name's Old Dog was what we called him, but he was an electrician, in his career. And he just saw so much fraud, waste, and abuse. One day he sent up this report, and after that, everything rolled downhill. It was really funny, but it also got us kind of in trouble with the command staff. But we realized, and if you think about this, imagine the Chinese or the Russians are paper tigers now, but let's say they come in and they take over an American city and they wreck the infrastructure. Well, first of all, of course, we're never gonna let that happen. But let's say it does for the most part. They come in and they destroy the water, the sewage, the trash collection, our electricity. So all of our creature comforts are gone. You know what you're going to have on your hand? You're going to have a thriving insurgency. Even people who don't know how to fight are going to be passing off the information to the people that do know how to fight because they're pissed off. And it's also hot. It's like 140 degrees outside during the summer. I have photos of this to where you're just baking to death. And so you're just mad because you're hot. So you're like, yeah, I'm going to pick up an AK and shoot at American forces. But you restore those creature comforts, you protect the civilian populace, and you do reconstruction efforts, and suddenly the shooting stops, which is exactly what happened. We had a guy named Travis Patriquin. He's been in several books now, and he's really the credit that we have that started, counterinsurgency operations. And he created this PowerPoint, and he was a former Special Forces guy who became the S5, which is the Civil Affairs Liaison to Colonel McFarland and the Ready First Brigade. And he basically said, here's how you fix Ambar. He said, number one, he said, you get the creature comforts restored. We start all these reconstruction efforts, but we get the local and tribal sheikhs involved, recruit their men to the Iraqi police and the Iraqi army, and then we funnel the projects to Iraqi contractors while giving credits to the sheikhs, and then we sit back and we watch the city become pacified. And sadly, he died before he ever got to see any of this work. He was killed by a daisy-chained IED, but that was the methodology that we went with, and it worked. We pacified the most violent city in all of Iraq within the span of 12 months by doing exactly that and causing the Ambar awakening with Sheikh Za'atar and everybody else. And we worked to get, I remember when the shooting stopped, when we started getting a consistent 18 hours of electricity to the city of Ramadi, everything started quelling. Like people had their creature comforts back and they stopped shooting at us.
Could you give our viewers at home a sense of how many IED strikes per day were happening in Ambar the day one and then the day you left, to give people a taste of just how dramatic the turnaround was? Ballpark.
Oh, well, I can tell you this. Route Michigan, which was the major thoroughfare, had 5 to 10 IEDs on it per day. That's one road. I don't know how many, but usually every day there was an IED on every single road there. So let's say 50 roads. So
you do
60,
the math.
70 IEDs. I don't know. And the tough part is it wasn't like they were digging. They got more advanced. They created what we call pizza box IEDs, which are just pressure plate ones. They look like a pizza box, and they were able to just sling them into the middle of the road.
Yep.
And we'd either run over them and blow up, or they would do that. We'd see it, we'd stop, and then they'd create a complex ambush out of that.
Yep. And by the time you guys left, it was, as you said, it was pacified. There was very little of that kind of stuff.
5K fun run. Shortly after I left is what I heard through the And like,
mean,
that's insane to us,
yeah,
because like before it was like my first day there, we were getting shot at by snipers.
right. Yeah. I mean, there was a lot of sacrifice and heavy lifting that went on with that particular rotation, but it was so inspirational, right? Because it not only like gave people in Anbar obviously hope for the future. You saw the results, but honestly, it like gave those of us who were on tap to go rotate into country the following years hope as well. Like there were times where I was like, we're going to lose this thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're going to be run out of the country. It was so
Yeah.
bad. And I watched this go on from the comfort of my home and I'm like, wow, this thing can turn around. And so it was the work you guys did is over there was fantastic.
Well, and the great part too, I mean, the sad part, but also the great part is in 2015, Ramadi fell to ISIS. And I
Right.
think we all remember when ISIS like took over everywhere, Mosul, they were killing everybody, kidnapping Christians, like up in, what is that, Kurdistan area,
Yeah.
and just beheading everyone.
Yeah.
Well, eventually, unlike the Afghans, the people in Ramadi stood up and kicked them out.
Mhm.
Ramadi now, if you can go look up at videos of this, it's insane. It blows my mind. The Emiratis and the Qataris came in and dumped like all this money into reconstruction efforts in Ramadi after ISIS took over. And now they're building luxury resorts and hotels in Ramadi. It's insane. So
Wow.
you wouldn't even recognize it. There's cafes now next to the Euphrates River. I've seen reels of this stuff now, and it blows my mind. And for me, that's where I go, okay, something happened there. That's, I look back fondly on that now.
Yeah. It Ben does a really good job from a ground level perspective of describing those campaigns, and I definitely check it out if you want to learn more about what happened in Anbar with the awakening and the standing up of the sons of Iraq. It was really amazing work, and I definitely will always appreciate the work that you guys did because it did generate a lot of momentum that ended up sweeping across the country, and it was a true turning point. I did want to ask you one question, kind of like you. I was kind of in a non-traditional kind of um, part of the military that dealt into soft skills, right?
Yeah.
Um, what kind of challenges did you have not only as a guy on the ground making things happen, but when you go to plans and when you're doing updates to commanders, kind of like coaching people in command positions and leadership positions, or even just on the ground soldiers who aren't well versed in the soft arts of war,
Yeah.
convincing them that this is the right approach, right? Like that's got to be a huge challenge with your job.
It was monumentally hard
Mhm.
every time because they're like, we don't need these guys. We just need them for their interpreter. That's why we're bringing them along.
Right.
But what they didn't realize is that we had the skill sets to effectively work with everybody in the area to gather the intelligence. And I remember when asymmetrical warfare was first stood up, they went on clearing operations with us because they knew our value and worth. And so they kept trying to recruit all of us too. Afterwards, they're like, hey, why don't you come over to asymmetrical warfare?
Mhm.
But, because it's not the standard combat that you're thinking of. And so the way that I won people over was by showing my competency and then also at the same time showing I could hang with them and that I wasn't going to be a detriment to the mission, but instead being a coalition asset.
Mhm.
And as I began to work with those infantry line units and they saw me, and I'm outside the wire every day and I'm with them and I can kick in doors and I can do everything that they can do. And made friends with them, they just begin to see me and the members of my team as one of them. And that
Yep.
even happened with the Marines. One of my close friends now, he's also my business partner, is a guy named Major Scott Husing. And there are good leaders and there are bad leaders in the military. I know that a lot of people like to romanticize the military as not having these issues, but we have bad leaders.
Mhm.
And it can happen. And sometimes those leaders are in positions of leadership, which you really don't want. And I remember when Scott came in, we were getting ready to clear the city. It was during the Battle of Ramadi. We were walking out the front gate on on Christmas Day, like the evening. We got Christmas Eve and Christmas actual day off, but then we staged that night on Christmas Day, and then walked out in the early mornings. But I'd been planning with him. He's leading this whole thing, and I was like, is this going to be a dude who listens to me? I've been working in this area for months now. And he took the time to listen. He was like, all right, what about these houses? What about these people? What about this area? Because he was new. He was coming from the southern side over to an area that I had exclusively worked in. And I just saw that he had the ability. He was willing to learn, and he knew what he was walking into. And when you have those good leaders at the top that are willing to listen and look at you, amazing things can happen. But sometimes you got to earn your place at the table. And oftentimes, I found that I had to earn my place at the table and prove my worth. And when I was able to do that, they began to trust me and believe in what I could provide to them, especially when I came back with actionable intelligence.
Yep. One of the things that I find very interesting, you hear a lot of people talk about the Marine Corps. Right? You work with a lot of Marines, and I had a guest who was just a very bright, smart, driven guy, Genghis Khan in the previous episode, just awesome. And my experience of the Marines is not what people in pop culture like to portray them as crayon eaters, moved straight from point A to point Z type of guys. Like I've always, after you work with the Marines in an area like that, you realize how resourceful they are and creative they are. I mean, you seem in your book, maybe I'm wrong, but you seem to be pretty complimentary to the Marines you worked with in Ambar. They're pretty sharp, pretty tough hombres, but they're also really sharp too.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a little bit of both ends. They are crayon eaters to a degree. Like, I mean, they love to break stuff. If you absolutely, positively need something destroyed and broken, call the Marines. They're going to do a great job at it. They're fantastic. And that's, and that was great. Like when you go out with them and you know that you're about to be in the shit, like you want some Marines next to you. They're competent. And they're all riflemen and they know what they're doing. But I had a great time with them. Some of them I didn't, but the same is true for the Army. The same is true for the Navy. The same is true for the Air Force. But they are portrayed often probably wrongly. But also at the same time, they really are great. I mean, I literally have a Marine Corps tattoo because it's one of my combat patches, and it's on my back there, Guadalcanal, first Mardiv, because I was with the Echo Company 2-4. And I think one of the coolest moments of my life recently was that they asked me to join the 2-4 Association, which is the Magnificent Bastards, as a life member. I was like, well, I'm in the Army, and they go, it doesn't matter. You fought underneath us in Ramadi. You're with us. And I went to a Marine Corps reunion this year. And I was like, this is so cool. And they're like, why is the Army guy here? And then, once I started talking, and they're like, oh, he's one of us. So I was like, I guess that makes me a partial crayon eater now or whatever. Okay. So I'm really proud to have served with them. And like I said, initially I did want to be a Marine, and I had the opportunity to serve underneath them and alongside them. And it was a very positive experience for me.
Being asked to be part of that's mad respect. That's great stuff, man. Is there in your 2 tours, was there a specific moment or a day that kind of changed how you saw yourself or the war itself?
Yeah. I remember the day that the war changed for me, and I write about this in my book, where when we invaded Iraq, and this goes back to the question, like, what were we doing? Did you feel we accomplished something? It's 2006, and at this point, that there are no weapons of mass destruction. And it's like, was Saddam Hussein selling chemical weapons to Syria? Sure. Like, we all know Assad gassed the hell out of his people. Fine. That's fine. But did he have WMDs? No. So the question is like, what are we doing there, man? And I remember one of my sergeants looks at me, and we're on top, and we're pushing this thing off. It's like this water thing. I can't remember exactly what it was, but we push it off. We're laughing, and then he just looks at me and he goes, "What the fuck are we doing here, man?" And I was like, And prior to that, like Ramadi had this weird, and like, forgive me if this sounds critical, but again, like if you weren't there, you don't know, but this is all true. And many of us have wondered, what did we do? What did we, what were the wars for to some degree? And I talked to it about Vietnam vets who feel like we got the same, same deal. Oh, we're going to fight communism and keep America safe. And really, for me, I believe it was more about foreign policy, which I'll get into here in just a second. But looking at it, we had 2 landing zones at Camp Pramati where I was at. They had a regular one where we would fly in and out of on, our Blackhawks and Ospreys and everything else. And then they had a VIP landing zone. And the VIP landing zone was where all your senators and congressmen would come. And they would do like quick photo ops with the troops. But Ramadi was very violent, so they didn't stay long. But they would always go tour the Kellogg, Brown, and Root facilities there. And that caught my attention. It's like, what are they doing? And here are my guys fighting for their lives. Friends of mine have already been killed. People I know are dying or getting shot or getting their legs or arms blown off. And I'm sitting here going, what are we doing here, man? I'm like, we're fighting an insurgency now. Okay. But what are we doing? Like, what are we trying to accomplish? Like, what's the goal here as far as American policy? And now the way that I see it, like Afghanistan, people can get on board with, and then we just kind of botched it, especially when you read like the Pentagon papers that came out about like we had zero clear, like literally Rumsfeld was like, I don't know what we're doing here anymore. Like after 6 months, and then we just continued that for 20 years. We're like, we don't know what we're doing. We're just going to play around here for forever. Afghanistan made sense because of, the World Trade Center and everything else in 9/11. Okay, cool. Why Iraq? Well, the thing that you have to remember, and this goes back into my CA training, and, after I got out of the military, I went into geopolitical intelligence. It was just a good fit. I think we kind of created this. Iraq was more of like this linchpin between, so you have Afghanistan here, you have Iran here, and then you have Iraq here. What was interesting is eventually I moved into mental health, which I'm sure we'll get into.
Yep.
But I was on Vans Warped Tour because I worked for this mental health nonprofit that was in the music space and industry. And I met a fellow Iraq war veteran who did that early on. He was British Army, and he was intel. And he goes, can you tell me why we were drawing up invasion plans for Iran, like before we invaded Iraq? And I was like, no, I cannot. And it's pretty well known now. Like if you don't know, now you know. But what we did is we wanted to keep our enemies fighting each other in the Middle East. And we were very successful at that. Case in point, the Arab Spring. We literally completely destabilized the Middle East to where they would fight us there or they would just fight each other. And we were great at creating a Sunni Shia divide. So like you have to remember this, geographically, the Sunnis outnumber the Shias 6-1. And Saudi Arabia is Sunni and Muslim. And so therefore they claim to speak for Islam. Whereas the Shias are concentrated in Iran and are Persian. And they claim to speak for Islam. And so the Saudis love having Americans in the area because it's a nice little buffer zone between them and Iran. And so this is, again, personal and somewhat conjecture, but I think it lines up. I think we were there just simply out of a foreign policy plan, and we unfortunately sent young men and women to die for those foreign policy plans. Did it keep America safe? Yeah, we haven't had an attack since. But at what cost?
Right. And there's nothing, I think it's debatable to call that conjecture at this point.
Right. I mean, some people are going to push back, probably that are smarter than me.
Right.
But, I've talked with other guys in the geopolitical space, and we all tend to agree on this.
Right.
So,
I mean, yeah. And the whole purpose of this project is to give guys like you who have earned the right to share their opinion in an unfiltered way to do so. And we're glad you did it. It's an important contribution. You mentioned earlier, and I want to provide some context. You mentioned the VIP landing zone and how the senators would go would go visit like Kellogg Brown Root. I think it's what's called Kellogg Brown Root, right?
Yep.
KBR,
Kellogg Brown
which
Root.
is a defense contractor.
Halliburton. It's a subsidiary of Halliburton, which we all know Dick Cheney and.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Could you give? And this is totally like asking you just a guesstimate. Can you give some color to just how much freaking money was spent while you were there? I mean, I know I'm not asking you for a dollar figure, but like, I don't think that people around the country really understand just how much money poured into that war effort.
Oh, billions with a B.
Yeah.
That's not conjecture. I can tell you that with certainty. I can tell you, I still have, so if anybody ever wants to come check me, I still have I was worried after I got back from Iraq because we did so many reconstruction efforts and I withdrew so much money. Like I have millions of dollars that I paid out, millions. And I have all the paperwork still here at my house. I kept it all because I was like, if anybody ever tries to come back and say I stole something, I have it all documented and everything. So now this stuff is over 20 years old, but if some historian wants to be like, hey, can I get copies of that? I'll be like, sure, man, I've got stacks.
You heard it here, folks.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, I literally have photos of me. I can send them to you even where, it's so funny. We think of like, $20,000. That's a big number in our mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I've held, $1 million. I've held $100,000. $20,000 is about this big in a stack of hundreds. And I have a photo of me holding it. I got one where I have like a stack about that much. That's about 300,000, just of $100 US bills. And we would withdraw from the finance teams and have to sign all this out and everything, and then pay these local contractors. I am utterly convinced, though, that there are soldiers out there that robbed the United States government because the checks and balances were non-existent. And the other thing, too, is I don't write about this in my book, but I'll tell it to you in this. I don't think I've even mentioned this at any of the podcasts that I've ever been on. A lot of times the contractors would try and give us money back because that's a very Arab culture thing to do. It's a gesture of good faith. And we're like, whoa, yo, we can't touch this. And they're like, no, like this $10,000 is for you for getting me the contract. And I was like, hey man, we don't play that way. No thanks. I guarantee there are probably some teams out there, some infantry guys that definitely took it and were able to get home with it. Like you pop that stuff in your boots, you hide it in an MRE thing in an ISU 90 or whatever. That's how we snuck a Makarov back home from Afghanistan.
Yep.
So yeah, like that's. I think that there was a ton of fraud, waste, and abuse, and the American taxpayer paid for all of this.
Yes.
All of it, which is crazy.
It is crazy, man. And this conversation can go on for hours. There's so much more to your story that we want to cover. I'll just offer this for folks to chew on. When we start talking about wars in the current media space that could potentially happen, where it would require us to occupy a country or execute regime change, it is so important that veterans who lived it, who saw Iraq and Afghanistan, remind our lawmakers, remind our fellow citizens just how costly these sorts of things are. And that's not, I'm not making a political statement, but that is a great value I feel that our generation of veterans can now make to our policymakers who think that, a regime change in some country in the Western Hemisphere might be a good idea, right? Like there is a huge amount of money, blood, and treasure, right, that's going to be spent on that effort. And you have to ask yourself, is it all worth it? It's a question that I think that not enough people in DC ask. We just kind of drift into these things, and it's very frustrating. So,
and I think most of us veterans really, because we're trained to be apolitical, I think there are those that go off the deep end. I really try and stay apolitical, and I try and see the nuance as far as everything. But yeah, like there's a shirt that I've seen recently that says draft Congress for World War III. And I'm like, yes, please.
Nice. So let's pivot a little bit because there's a whole bunch of your story, and frankly, I think this is the really important stuff here. About you, the man, and we had a guest on. We were talking about like reforms that need to be made at West Point, and he made an interesting point, and a lot of people agree with him, which is that West Point got away from its roots by drifting more toward being a liberal arts school, having more classes on humanities, and getting away from engineering. And he had some pretty strong opinions on that. Now, you've talked about the importance of humanities, music, art, philosophy, and helping people process war. So, what role did those disciplines play for you personally during your deployment and after?
Oh, they were huge. They were massive. So, all right. So think about this. One of the biggest questions that I wrestled with is like, what is the purpose of human beings? As a species. Like you and I can each say, oh, my individual purpose in life is to be a podcaster, or for me to be a keynote speaker. Or if you're Babe Ruth, it's like to knock 100 home runs, or whatever. That's intrinsic. That's intrinsic purpose. What about extrinsic purpose as a species? And when I began wrestling with that question, I was like, well, it seems like we're really good at killing each other, like we're really good at that. Like we love to kill each other, and that jacked with me, man. And so, if you look at like the secular humanist view, and you look at science, apparently, in 3 billion years, we have the entropic heat death of the universe, where the sun becomes a red dwarf. We as a species cease to exist. We're done, unless we like figure out interstellar travel or time space or what. But we're done. Like if we're done as a species, then why does anything we do matter? Why does love matter? Why does rape matter? And all of that, they say, well, it's a chemical reaction in the brain to advance the species. Again, why does that matter? Like if nothing matters, then why are you telling me to live a more moral life or do the right thing or take care of people or show compassion or whatnot if it's nothing more than a chemical reaction in my brain? Okay. And if I'm thinking about it logically, then logically I should be able to do whatever I want if I take that engineering route. And yet we all know we would just create hell on earth if that was the case. And here's something that I've never had anybody be able to answer. That is, we all know that the most mentally handicapped person on earth carries more weight than an animal or even a prize winning horse like the Secretariat. But we can't prove that. So why do we matter more than a bug? Or why do we matter more than a horse or, an elephant or anything? And we know that we do. So what is our purpose as human beings? Well, if you go at that from a very logical route, you're going to end up in a really dark hole, as opposed to like, what is the purpose of human beings? Like from an existential perspective, like if you study the existentialists, like, and there's even absurdists like Albert Camus and Jean-Paul Sartre. I don't agree with them. I like their writings, but I think their consensus leads you down into a black hole, and probably why a lot of them killed themselves. And if you look at it from, other perspectives like Kierkegaard and Brueggemann and these other philosophers and people to where we derive meaning and value. And here's the thing, I will argue this point to the death with anybody who thinks it's just all about logic, because that's irrelevant. If you go back, if you were deserted on a desert island, right, and you come in contact with an indigenous population that has never had contact with outside man, you are still going to find 3 things in common with the rest of humanity. And that's math. They have to have some way to count coconuts. Story, because stories unite us all. And music, because music is just a story set to a beat. And that's is logic really going to matter, the math part in the end, or is it the stories? What are we fascinated more by? The fact that we're making tally marks on a wall, or the story of a caveman who draws a buffalo hunt. Well, again, that's a story. That's ours. That's humanity's. Our drawings connect and drive us. And if you are willing to say, oh, the arts and the humanities don't matter, you are setting people up to logically just kill one another and advance the species in a way that doesn't really matter, where there is no beauty and everything's just gray and dull. So that's my soapbox.
Powerful stuff, man. And I've You're far better read than me. I have abandoned the philosophy. I've stayed away from the great philosophers, but I promise you, I will start looking at it because there seems to be just so much there that I'm missing in terms of trying to interpret what's around me. And you already had that up in your head when you were in those war zones, and you saw things that were completely different than most of the folks around you, who many folks weren't well read at all. Many of them just read like history books probably about war, right? Or were engineers. But there were very few guys in the formation that had your academic background and the intellectual curiosity that you did, and you viewed things very differently. And I think that's really cool to talk to someone like you, man.
Yeah, and like even the modern philosophers like Alistair McIntyre
Mhm.
and Luc Ferry, who's a French philosopher, have really put things in perspective. The one that messed me up the most, I think it's Ferry who did this, who said it. He said, for the first time in the history of our species, we have the means to destroy the entire planet, and yet the species does not know where it's going. And I was like, oh, that'll jack me up. And it did.
Yeah.
I'm like, we can destroy the whole world, and yet we don't know why we would do that as a species. Like, that's such a weird, when you think about it, you're like, that's weird.
Yeah.
So,
You-
no.
If when you read Ben's book, one thing that will hit you right on the head is his love for heavy metal. He's got the shirt on too. You mentioned about music, and you mentioned about love, and you had this very positive thing, yet you're a huge metal fan, which can be kind of dark in my experience. At least the good
Yeah.
stuff can be really dark, right? So like, how do you square that circle, man? Like what's talk to me about like how heavy metal kind of fits into the way that you kind of view the world.
Well, the interesting part is that, with regard to heavy metal,
Mhm.
it has some really deep lyrics. I think most people don't recognize that. And, based on Spotify and everything else that we know, metal is actually the most popular genre in the entire world.
Hmm.
You got to remember Scandinavia's got the lockdown on metal too. But for me, growing up, it talked a lot about the things that matter to me. And I think early on, they talked a lot about, the mental health crisis and like Metallica, like you think about Master of Puppets, and you have songs like Disposable Heroes, which talks about a veteran, who goes to war, or a soldier who goes to war and becomes cannon fodder.
Yeah.
You have songs like One, that is very iconic for all of us in the military. You look at some of the newer metal, and they describe the struggles that many of us face. So for me, it hit on that deeply personal level.
Mhm.
And the musicianship is phenomenal. Some of the best drummers in this world are metal drummers. And, jazz is obviously up there too. But when you look at like the craftsmanship behind it, it is absolutely incredible. And so I think more often than not, we get a really bad rap with regard to, metalheads are mean and dark and everything. The opposite is true. Like, most of us are just really nice people who
Mhm.
like heavy music,
Yeah.
we're,
Well, the
and we're
prime
happy
minister of
people because of
Japan,
that.
she's a metalhead. Did you read about
Mhm.
that? Yeah, that's kind of
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. So, and metal's actually really huge in Japan.
Mhm.
So I, I, I meet more, people that like Taylor Swift that are mean than guys that I do that listen to music that everybody thinks like sounds like we're worshiping Satan. And
It
so I was always just drawn to that heavy style of music. And man, I totally dig it. It touches something here in my soul that I'm like, yeah, I can relate to this.
it I mean, like, it's pretty common for guys in the military to like, whether it's rap, metal, to
Mhm.
like aggressive or kind of like emotionally raw music. I
Yeah.
mean, that's pretty common, right? Did you find that kind of music helps you reconnect to feelings or maybe even suppress your memories of war at all?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I worked for this entity called Heart Support, which was founded by Jake Lors. He's the lead singer of a Grammy-nominated metal band called August Burns Red. And so out of that, I did a lot with the music industry, especially heavy metal and what we call the scene, which involves pop punk and just kind of what you would expect from a Vans Warped Tour, or even a Lollapalooza or something of that nature. So all of us have songs we listen to on our best days, and all of us have songs that we listen to on our worst days. You go through a breakup. You're probably, this is going to be kind of a trope, but you might be listening to Air Supply, I'm all out of love. I'm so lost without you or something like that, and there's songs about
I have
heartbreak.
no idea what you're talking about. I'm just.
Oh yeah. Liar. So there are songs that, just pump us up and are like, oh man, today is a good day. And then there's songs that we listen to when things are hard. And for me, I named every single chapter after a metal song in my book. And people have slowly caught on to that. So it has everything ranging from like Soundgarden to Alice in Chains to Parkway Drive to August Burns Red to Fit for a King to, Metallica to Slayer. And it's because some of those songs were the soundtrack to my wars. And I wanted to respect that because it's what I was listening to get pumped up before missions. Like, I know that the PSYOP guys, like back during Operation Phantom Fury, which is Fallujah, were to pump all the Marines and everybody up. They would blast metal and hard rock and rap over the speakers enough so much that it earned the nickname Lollapalooza.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
I mean, you're such an interesting guy. I have to ask this question. So if we'll talk more about faith later, I guess we'll go ahead and preview. Faith is an important part of your story. Not something that conventional, right? That a man of faith in this evangelical world in which we live, this likes heavy metal. Like, do you still like metal?
Weird spit. Oh yeah,
it's still part of. I mean, how again? Like, talk to me about that. Like, you're a man of faith, Christian.
Yeah, so I grew up in a Christian household and environment. But the thing you have to remember is like, I grew up in the 80s and 90s where if you weren't a part of a church, like you were not considered a good businessman or community leader or anything. I remember it was fascinating. Like my grandfather, he was like, oh yeah, I'm a Christian, but Jesus was just a nice man and prophet. I was like, I don't think you can really call yourself a Christian if you don't believe that. Like, that like the whole basis of Christianity is you believe he's God. Like, so I thought that was weird. So, but he was very active in the church and he owned a business and that's just what people did, And so, growing up in the 80s and 90s, metal was heavily ostracized because you had Satanic Panic. And honestly, there's a great new podcast out about Satanic Panic in the 80s and 90s. It's called Devil in the Deep Blue Sea. And Christianity Today, ironically, did all the research on it. And talked about how it became this thing where like everybody was worried that, by playing a record backwards, it was going to tell you to worship Satan and then stab your parents and do meth and all that fun stuff. So, and they would pick like the most, innocent bands ever, ranging from like Rush to like Journey, like goofy stuff, like the real Tom Sawyer, play it backwards and they're like, kill your parents, it just is silly stuff. And there's even a documentary on it that you can pull up on YouTube from the 80s called Hell's Bells if you want to go down a rabbit hole of insanity. So, growing up for me, I got ostracized a lot because of the fact that I liked metal and hard rock. And, I was growing up in a church environment because that's what everybody did in Oklahoma. Oklahoma's the buckle of the Bible Belt. My parents met at a Bible college. It was very fundamentalist. And so like the big thing though is like growing up, I grew up in what's called the Word of Faith and Prosperity Gospel movements. Now, the Word of Faith is kind of like this name it and claim it. Prosperity Gospel is this belief that if you have enough faith, like God will, and, you're a good little boy or girl, that, God will reward you for your faith and drop a Maserati on your porch. And those guys still exist today, like Joel Osteen and Creflo Dollar and Kenneth Copeland and like all those. I mean, they're just, I'm going to call a spade a spade. They're charlatans. And, they're preying on the poor, and they have these $1 million homes, and yet they look nothing like the man that they claim to follow. And it's still continue on in this day and age. It's just more subversive. Pastors get these housing tax exemptions, and Sean Ryan recently did a really good podcast where this guy Nathan Apfel come on and talk about these megachurch pastors that are just making hand over fist money and just taking advantage of the poor and the marginalized. But the point being is, like, for me growing up, being that kid, and I had long hair that was parted down the middle all the way to my shoulders, and I wore the Jinko jeans and the band T-shirts and stuff. I got picked on a lot,
Mhm.
and everything that I was told in church was like, oh, it's satanic, and so more and more, I saw that the church community did not act in the same way that of the man that they claimed to follow. There was a lot of hypocrisy. There was a lot of judgmentalism of the outsiders, not people inside the church, but outside of the church. It was like, this person's outside of God's will, and we gotta, we gotta get them out, and the moral majority, and the rise of Jerry Falwell, and then just the intermingling of politics, and it became about blessing. And eventually, around my teenage years, I was like, I think this is all bunk. I don't believe this. And to be honest, I don't think I ever really had.
Yeah.
It was this thing that I did. It was this thing that I was a part of, and I knew the right answers because I had grown up in church. But there's a difference between like head knowledge and heart knowledge. And so, like, intellectually, I could give everybody the right answers because I had grown up in church. Didn't mean that I necessarily believed it. And so when I was around 16 or 17, um, my parents, and I really respect them for this, they said, we want you to kind of find your own path. And I've done the same thing with my own kids, to where, I don't want my faith or my beliefs to be theirs because I'm like, you have to believe this stuff. I want them to find their own path and be curious and open to questions and ask hard questions. And funny enough, my daughter's actually being baptized on Sunday because that's her decision, not mine.
Some.
And I wanted to make sure that she understood everything, and could explain it in a fashion that is articulate, which I'll get into here in a minute. So I go to this church. This guy's on TV. He's popular. The church is like blowing up because he's popular, and he's preaching these messages that are more emotionally manipulative than anything that they have to do with, like, God or Jesus or anything. I remember, like, he would teach messages that hit on like all my core wounds of being ostracized and whatnot growing up. And I still remember the one that I like took notes on, and it was, 5 reasons why you're acting like a loser or something like that, and God doesn't want you to be a loser. And it was more like a Tony Robbins talk than anything.
Yep.
And eventually this guy, he got found out, man. He's like sleeping with his secretary. Him and his wife are swingers. They're drug addicts. They're partying. And he's embezzling money out of the church. And one of our family friends had started going to the church. He was a private investigator. So he revealed all this information. Church implodes. This other guy has to take over, who was my youth pastor. Just kind of a disaster. And I was just like, this is all garbage. Christians are just frauds, man. Like, F these guys, I'm out. And so I did the early thing that we now know of as quiet quitting. I just quietly quit the church. I was like, I'm not going to tell anybody, because if you tell anybody, like, during that time period and that day and age, they'd be like, oh, well, Satan's going to torture your butthole for all of eternity, so you better believe or else. And I'm like, that's a really good way to win people over. So I was like, I got to get out of Oklahoma. This place sucks. I'm out. So I joined the military, and then I start wrestling, obviously with the human condition, and then I get out of war. And I'm going through a divorce. My wife had left me, was in Ramadi, um, and, and shortly after she gets home, she's already found somebody else. And so I'm living on my best friend's couch. I'm getting drunk every night. I'm crying in the shower. I don't have a job. Things are looking really bad. She'd also taken all my money, which I didn't really piece together until like years ago. Like, not
Wow.
cool. So I've got like a couple $1,000s, maybe like 10 grand in my bank account after a 15-month tour where we had no bills and she was working. That's not cool. So I'm like, I got to get a job. I got to figure some stuff out. And so, um, my buddy who I'm just crashing on his couch, he just looks at me one day and he's like, "Hey man, can I take you to church?" And I think he was just out of options. He was throwing darts at a mat because he was an atheist.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, "I don't know, man. Like, what's that going to do for either one of us?" And he's like, "I don't know. Maybe you'll meet a nice Christian girl with some morals and values as opposed to some chick who left you in the middle of a war zone." I was like, "Yeah, that's what I need after a divorce, buddy."
Yeah.
Um, so we go to a couple churches. They suck. I'm like, this is dumb. And then he's like, "Oh, I heard about this church that, is for people like us." And so I end up going. It's called Gateway Church in Austin, Texas. Is pastored by a guy named John Burke, who wrote this New York Times bestseller called Imagine Heaven. He's an awesome guy. He's still one of my close friends. Not to be confused with Gateway Dallas. There's no relation there. That guy's a pedophile. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So please don't confuse those two if you're listening. But anyway, we so I start going, and John was an engineer before he became a Christian, so he had a very analytical and skeptical mind. And so he was really good at like answering a lot of my, "oh yeah, right" questions. And I just met people that for the first time in my life that began to pour into me that were authentic Christians. Like they had a care for the margins. They cared for guys like me that were really messy. They were kind. They were compassionate. They were long suffering. They seemed to have a lot of peace and joy in their life. They weren't involved in, politics being their life. And unfortunately, I think that within the evangelical era that we live in now, we have this thing called Christian nationalism, which is actually a heresy. And it's people that are taking aspects of America, God, and country, and then combining them. And what George Barna, who's of the Barna Group, they studied Christian trends, has discovered is that a lot of American Christians believe in this thing called syncretism. And it's like, I'm going to take a little bit of this idea and ideology over here, a little bit of my Christian faith, this politic belief over here, this philosophy over here. I'm going to put it in a blender, shake it up, and that's what I believe. And so most people are creating God like in their own image. I love what Blaise Pascal said. He said, God created man in his own image, and then man turned around and returned the favor. And so what we're seeing in society anymore, and South Park has done a great job mocking Christians, and rightly so. I think that they deserve to be mocked. Is that we are seeing a society that lost its purpose, meaning, and direction, and so they've turned to faith. But now politics has also become kind of the way that people find their meaning, purpose, and direction. So they're marrying the two in this really gross amalgamation. And instead of being kind and looking like the man that they claim to follow, they're becoming more like angry. They spew hate and vitriol. Like instead of loving their neighbor, they ostracize their neighbor, anybody that's different from them. And the fact is, and I'm going to go out on a limb here. And before you come at me, just remember that the Apostle Paul says that believers are actually supposed to judge one another. Jesus says, like, don't judge, but he's talking about the outside world. He's not talking about those inside the church.
Yep.
I don't think the vast majority of people that claim to be Christians are actually Christians. And here's why. Dr. Timothy Keller, since deceased, he wrote this really great article. And he was pointing out that in order to be a Christian, like you can't just believe that like Jesus was a nice man and, because he exclusively claimed to be God. He said stuff that would make him crazy. If you just think he's like a nice man. And the core and the crux of the Christian faith is this idea called the gospel. And what I discovered is that most Christians cannot explain what that is. But that's like the core fundamental belief, like that you have to believe. Otherwise, you really can't call yourself a Christian. It's like, and he pointed out that like if you're a board member, this is Keller talking. He said, if you're a board member of Greenpeace, he said you could disagree on like what caused climate change. Is it humans? Is it, just the temperature of the earth naturally heating up or whatever? But everybody believes that climate change is a real thing. However, if you're a board member of Greenpeace and you come out and you go, climate change is a hoax, they would ask you to resign, right? Because that's a core founding principle of Greenpeace is that climate change exists. In the same manner and respect, Christians have to believe this thing called the gospel. And most of the time I meet people when they try to explain it, it sounds like they're trying to explain the plot to the Goonies, but it's a T-Rex in a fighter jet fighting aliens. And that's how they explain it. And I'm just like, bro, like if you can't even explain this, believe this. And so they don't even know what they believe. They claim to know Bible verses, but they do these hermeneutical gymnastics, and that's like scripture, interpreting scripture, to where they get all worked up over stupid secondary and tertiary issues that don't really matter. And they don't know the greatest commandment, love God, love your neighbor. And then they don't know the Great Commission, go and make disciples. And so, like, for me, I'm very critical of American Christianity as far as everything. And faith has become a very important part of my life, and spirituality in the Christian faith, because I explored every single major world religion. And then for me, I found Christianity both intellectually satisfying and emotionally stimulating. And out of that, I don't want to just be another guy that doesn't look like the man he claims to follow. And I'm going to screw that up. I'll be the first to admit that. But I want to be humble enough that when I fall down, that I can own my shortcomings. And then also at the same time, love people very different from me. I don't have to agree with everything that they're into or even their lifestyle, but I want to love them just as I love myself. And so that is a core of the faith. And if you can't live those things, man, like I don't know what God you're worshiping, but it sure isn't the historically accurate biblical Jesus that you're worshiping. You've probably created your own God, and he probably hates you.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is your God is going to drag you down into the pits of hell, because like you just created this own one that never challenges you, hates the same people as you, acts exactly like you. And that's a problem. Like the God that I follow constantly challenges me, constantly challenges my ideas, constantly challenges my lifestyle and my way of living and the way that I think. So
Powerful stuff,
there you
man. And no, it's great. And going back, I kind of view your kind of journey like so many others, right? That I've observed. I have my own faith. I'm a Christian as well, but like so many people do it because they were born into it, or maybe they came into it later in life. They see something they don't like, or so they do one of two things. One is they ignore it and they just kind of like keep on keeping on, right? Or B, they just turn their backs on it and they leave and they say, this isn't for me. This is all a bunch of lies and hypocrisy. But your story, you kept exploring, right? You kept asking the questions, and you kept questioning, and you kept trying to find the answers. And you looked at places like C.S. Lewis. You and I were talking about C.S. Lewis had a major impact on your life. The Problems of Pain, Mere Christianity, all these great books, they resonated with you. And I think it shows that like Christianity isn't something you can just say, yep, I'm saved, and then you move on with your life. It's a life of work, right? Of study, prayer, reflection.
It is. And I think most people are, there's this, I want to coin this term, that the slur against the Republican guys that I guess Trump has been using is rhino, which is Republican in name only. Well, I think we should call one called Sino, which is Christian in name only. And out of that, like it's just, and again, like you got to be careful of the churches you go to also, because some of them are just there to make you feel good, or they're going to get you politically riled up and say you got to vote a certain way or this and that. And render to Caesar's what Caesar's, give to God what God, like, the kingdom of heaven is not of this earth. It's like what God, Jesus says. So, here's some, if you're looking for a church, here's some red flags. If the pastoral staff, because I worked in church world for a real long time, and like I teach in my church and everything. If they don't have open books and can't tell you where the money's going, or they won't reveal their pastor's salary, they're hiding something. And same thing, if you can't ever interact with your pastors or the people in that church, you don't have a church. You have a club where there's one guy at the top that nobody can ever have access to, and he just becomes a celebrity.
Yeah.
Those are all red flags, man. If they don't have a way to do missions or serve the poor or the margins, if it's just and it's all about your needs, that's a red flag.
Yeah.
So just be careful because there are a lot of, and I think good intentioned churches in the area, but it's become a cult of personality and a cult of feel goodism. And that's going to destroy your soul, man. You're not going to grow more humble, more kind, more peaceable, and have more joy in your life. You're going to grow more depressed, more angry, and think that everybody else around you is the problem as opposed to looking inwardly.
Yeah. Thanks, Ben. That's inspiring. I want to pivot a little bit towards the costs of war, the aftermath a little bit. This is an area that you're not just passionate about, but you pour yourself into this area. And one of the things that I found to be very refreshing was that you wrote candidly about trauma, addiction, and the long tail of war. Now, looking back, what do you wish someone had told you before you came home that maybe could have helped you? Could have given you the tools to be able to avoid those pitfalls that many veterans face when they come back.
Find a community. Like, I didn't know how tough it was going to be without, my brothers and sisters in arms.
Mhm.
And you may not think that you're dealing with stuff, but it'll hit at a later time period. I bring up Carl Marlantis again. He put Vietnam behind him, went about, doing his work, building a business and everything. And then he went to this like conference thing that was like kind of counseling with his wife. And they just asked him this one question and it triggered all these unsuppressed, and he struggled with years of post-traumatic stress and moral injury after that.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing happened to me right around 2016. I wrote about war for really the first time in depth, and it went stupid viral. And then more people wanted me to write on that. And it started bringing things to the surface that I hadn't dealt with. And by 2020, I was doing EMDR therapy again. And granted, I had already been through, post-traumatic stress counseling, 12-step, like all types of stuff. And the 12-step wasn't for drug addiction or anything like that, even though I did during the early years. And that stuff, I just quit cold turkey because I realized I was killing myself.
Mm-hmm.
But it was just I realized that I really disliked who I was. And I had a lot of self-hate because of the things that I had done overseas and the things that I had seen. So I had put in the work, just very quietly and on my own, but
Mm-hmm.
also at the same time, there was just stuff that I just didn't ever talk about it. Like my wife didn't know anything. My friends, like I literally remember my friend being like, "Hey, I've seen your medals on the wall in your office, but aside from that, I don't know. What did you do overseas, man?"
Uh-huh.
Because I never talked about it. I never brought it up. And then when I started talking about it and bringing the stuff up, man, it just caused years of unresolved trauma to bubble to the surface. And started having to do EMDR therapy and eventually did ketamine infusions too. And it really helped, and more, you have to break those chains off of you. But I really wish that somebody told me, like, you may be good now, you may not be good later. So be aware of that.
Yeah. That is such an important point. And when I talk to veterans who are retiring, they're leaving the military, and we talk about VA disability, and they're like, "Oh, I don't deserve that." It's not about
Mhm.
deserve, man. It's about taking an inventory of what you did during your career, because you may not be struggling with it now, but you're absolutely going to be struggling with it when you get to be my age or you get to be older, right?
Mhm.
And those resources are there to help you deal with that, not to pay your rent, right? There's
Yeah.
supposed to be a resource for you to be able to take care of yourself, to be able to cover like gaps and needs. And speaking for myself, I've been very public with it. I am an alcoholic. I haven't had a drink in going on 9 years now. And I absolutely fell into that despair alone. The only way I got out of it was with a group of like-minded men in my particular case to help me get out of it.
Yeah.
And also a doctor telling me like if I continue doing this, I'm going to be dead.
Yeah.
So I couldn't agree with you more. It resonates very strongly, and it is one of those nice things about being in the military is that unlike someone who maybe didn't serve and they went right into the corporate world or went into a non-military job, you don't have those structures in place, the squad, platoon, the company, your teammates. So that is an actual luxury that you and I enjoy, is that we always have teammates we can call upon, and we absolutely should. Um, you've you come across as a guy that has like an insatiable curiosity, man, like a real hunger to learn. Um, and I can't help but think that had a lot to do like with your ability to rebuild your life. I mean, intellectual curiosity, in my opinion, I've heard people say like, "Oh, if you overthink things, you're never going to be able to get out of a hole." Right? You have to simplify things. How do you respond to that? Like, it sounds like to me that you like to explore and learn as much as you possibly can. And that has played a pivotal role in your healing.
Yeah, I want to be a lifelong learner, you know? I want to explore new things. I want to be curious about that. And I think some of that can also just be your personality. Like there's this thing called the Strengths Finder. It's by Gallup research. And so like one of my number one strengths is input, which is where you love to just absorb information. So, I'll just retain info. Like, like when I was able to just spout off about the Sunni and Shia stuff, I was like, oh, that's from years of just study and knowing stuff, and just I'll read it once and retain this stuff, and I really enjoy that. But I think there's something beautiful about it, about learning something new every day. And right now we're not really learning new things is the problem.
Mhm.
We're being, like I said earlier, endlessly entertained. And I think you got to put down your phone and pick up a book and read about stuff. Because it's going to help you be a more rounded, a more curious individual. That's more kind and compassionate. And like, again, like I'm not saying you got, I've dropped, kindness and compassion and a lot of the warrior class, those are weird words for us to some degree,
Yeah.
but yes and no. Like we love the men that we fight beside. Like there is intense love there, and there's nothing weird about that. But if you don't love them, you're going to be a dirtbag. And for me, like I'm still very much that warrior, but I know how to be calm and peaceable too, and I'm learning to relax. I would hope. I tend to be high strung, but I hunt. I do jujitsu. I do Muay Thai. I like to fight. My kids are all in that stuff. I like to work out in the yard. Like I have that dad lawn where it's just like, I do the striping in my yard and the cross hatching because I want to have the best lawn,
Yeah.
and there's things like that I very much enjoy, as far as like that are very masculine and whatnot. But I think we've made the mistake of thinking that masculinity boils down to like kind of this rough machismo BS, as opposed to, you look at like some of the most masculine dudes like King David, who played a harp. Even for me, that's weird. So, um, and I have friends in my life that are they're sensitive but strong men. And man, it's just I think it's a beautiful thing to be a learner and to kind of figure out that there's more to life that you don't necessarily know about, and being okay admitting like, I don't have all the answers, but I want to find them out.
hmm So we're going to do a quick lightning round here. And I'm going
Nice.
to tell you about two briefings that you've been scheduled for. You
Okay.
have a briefing with the first briefing you have is to an incoming class of chaplains in training. So what advice would you have for them as they go about their duties? And many of them may have to go into combat someday with a battalion of soldiers. What what
That's
what advice do you have for those guys?
That one's super easy. Spend time with the troops. Spend all your time with the troops. Again, if you're trying to influence, persuade, and change them, we can sniff out an agenda. Like that's easy. Like it, and like especially if like you're Christian and whatnot, like people are going to know if you're like hanging around them because you want them to convert or whatever. Just become friends with those people. Like the biggest influence you're going to have on their life is just by being with them. And the problem now is like the chaplain is just kind of this place you go when you're in crisis. Sadly, I lost a friend of mine to suicide who was a chaplain. His name was Father Dennis Rochford. And he was instrumental in my faith journey. But he was everybody in the Marine Corps loved him. Number one, he was an infantry grunt in Vietnam, who was wounded in the Tet Offensive, one of 6 dudes to survive. But he was a legend in the Marine Corps and the Navy because he would go out and run with the troops. He would do ruck marches with the troops. He was always spending time with the troops, and everybody loved him. And even if they didn't believe, they would go to him when they were in crisis, because of the fact that he spent all his time with the troops. If you are not doing that, nobody's going to come to you. They're just going to think you have an agenda. So be the leader that they want you to be, to where you're not just this guy that they go to in crisis because, their NCO told them, hey, you should probably go talk to the chaplain about this because I don't have the right idea. Just be with them, get to know them, befriend them, show them that you do care. And I guarantee you're gonna make such a huge change in whatever unit or battalion you're in.
That's awesome. I can only imagine the chaplain that that you go to the chaplain and he thinks he'll be able to out-talk you on all these issues of faith, morality. You probably worked over more chaplains than I know. So that's awesome, man. The other thing that I wanted to ask you, your second briefing, is with Doug Collins, Secretary of the VA. You had a 5 minutes with Secretary Collins. What would you tell him about where the system is failing and maybe where the system is working pretty well? What would you have to say to him?
Oh God. Oh, this is just gonna set me up for failure. Everything's broken. I use the VA. I'm 100% PNT, permanent and total. I know I don't look like it. We call it disability. It really should be workman's comp. Like they broke my body. I'm about to have to get radio ablation in my back. I have spinal issues, discs, knee issues, traumatic brain injuries. And again, for those of you that are listening and you're a civilian, if you were at a McDonald's and you slipped outside or poured some hot coffee on yourself, you would get $1 million lawsuit for your just pain and suffering. They give us a couple measly bucks every month. Is that really fair for breaking our body, mind, and spirit? Okay, so I want you to think about that. So again, 100% permanent and total is where I'm at. I can't get seen half the time. They keep kicking out like all of the mental health specialists are on a complete backlog and list. Now, the one thing that he is doing well, they're churning out those disability and payment stuff, but who cares? Like, we don't want money. Also, we want care. Like, we want solid care, and you're screwing over your employees. You cannot add 700,000 people to the VA registry with the PACT Act and then fire half of your team. That is absurdity gone to extremes. And again, you're supposed to be apolitical. The email that I got recently where you blame the Democrats for shutting down, I don't care. I don't care. That's inappropriate. Like, do your job. Do your effing job, man. Like, you are supposed to take care of us, regardless of what side of the aisle that people land on. And I'll tell you what, I'm an equal to opportunity offender. I hate them both, but I don't care. I have friends that are Democrats. I have friends that are Republicans. That's irrelevant to me. We are veterans. And then on top of that, you've got to do better care for us because we are dying. We're dying from all the burn pit exposures, from cancer, and the way that there's not even an ounce of prevention. And the Hunter Severn Foundation does a great job of this. We have no screenings, PET scan screenings that we all need. And it's easier for you to pay us than take care of a sick veteran. And so you're just letting us die. And that's inappropriate. Like, you do a better job. Do your job, man. Like, it's not hard. Like, make those reforms. Like, put me in charge. I'll go NCO up for everybody. And again, bro, you're a Christian pastor, man. Like, take care of us. Like, what are you doing, bro? Please.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I too go to the VA hospital as well, and what I see in there are I do see at the ground level a lot of people who really want to do good things. I mean, many of these
I do
folks,
too.
many of these folks like take a huge pay cut. They could go to a private health system, right, and they can make a lot more money, but they choose to go to the VA. And nothing disturbs me more than seeing someone who cares, who gives a shit, who has his or her hands tied, or they can't because the system is so inefficient that they can't. To me, and I see it. I see the exhaustion. I see the frustration at the ground level. And so, I share your opinion on that matter. Every single word I agree with wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
We got a lot of great people, and I really hope we're not letting go of some of those really great people because of for political purposes, rather than what's the best healthcare outcome we're going to get for our veterans.
Unfortunately, we are. I've talked to friends who are mental health specialists inside the VA, and they're like, "I can't keep doing this, man." They're like, I'm gonna go to a private practice. I want to help vets, but my hands are tied." And
Yeah.
that's unfortunate, man. And the thing that I've started doing is I've started being really nice to all the people that I interact with, my doctors and everything, and let them know, like, look, I'm rooting for you guys. Like, I know you're trying to take care of us, but you have so many of us, and it's not fair to you.
Yeah.
So like I'm gonna tell you that to the VA people using the VA, like there are facilities that are really great.
Mhm.
I have friends that have great care, but if you're in a bigger city, it's kind of hard.
Yep.
And the tough part is that they're overwhelmed. And so for us as veterans, we can be mad at the institution. I don't think that we should be mad at like the doctors and the mental health specialists that are taking those pay cuts that do want to help us. Like, here's how bad my experience is recently. I dislocated my shoulder in April and tore my labrum and supraspinatus, and they couldn't see me for 3 months, and it would have been an easy fix, but it turned into frozen shoulder enough to where I couldn't even raise my arm. So I've been in physical therapy and having to do, peptide replacement stuff to get it moving back. And I am just now, it's almost November, getting back to that full range of motion. They could have taken care of it in a month.
Yeah.
And it blows my mind that that's what happens. Like the people, and so much of the civilian populace says like, hey, we should take care of our veterans. They went over and did all this stuff, and then it's too expensive. And they're like, oh, we got to cut all these benefits because of XYZ. I'm like, bro, you sent us to 20 years of war. What did you expect? This
Right.
is the longest running war in US history. What
Right.
did you think was going to happen? Did you not think that the system was going to be overwhelmed? Of
Right.
course, it's going to be overwhelmed.
Yep.
So,
And
yeah,
just noting that our generation, like guys who are retired, or guys who got out, they're now in their 50s, and the number of problems are just going to continue
we
to be
compile.
more and more and more.
I discovered I had asthma. I didn't even know.
Yeah.
I was having breathing problems and again, burn pits. They're like, you got a bunch of crap in your lungs. And
Yeah.
here's how bad things were. Again, going back to the PACT Act, once the PACT Act passed, and thank you, Biden administration, for passing that. I can give credit where credit's due.
Mhm.
Trump with the whole Israel Hamas thing, that's awesome. Credit where credit's due. But so when the PACT Act got passed, I finally got to see an ear, nose, and throat specialist, and my ENT was like, "This is one of the worst cases of infection and sinusitis that I've ever seen in my life." He was like, "You have to have surgery immediately." I've been service connected at 0% for sinusitis and allergic rhinitis since 2011.
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, we caused it because of the burn pits, but I couldn't even get seen until a couple years ago after the PACT Act, and I had to have major surgery. They did 8 different procedures on my nose and in my sinus canal. Yeah.
Amazing. Um, so I think we're getting close to wrapping up. I just want to come back to one final question, and it's a little bit self-indulgent on my part, so please forgive me. But you're such a well-read guy. You've studied the human condition. You are a philosopher, you're a man of faith. And now the military is going full tech. We're talking about
Yeah.
we're
Whew.
talking about artificial intelligence, we're talking about drones and autonomy. It's going to change it's going to change like the character of war, the things that are going on right now. Like how do you react to all that as a person who has who with your background and your interest? Like how do you think that's going to like play out?
So there's a couple things on this. So one, uh, let's use a little bit of backstory. When I went to Afghanistan, we were still using Vietnam tactics.
Mhm.
Um, and my buddy who I got injured with.
Mhm.
We still laugh about this to this day. So the techniques, tactics, and procedures at the time were still from the Vietnam era. You had the little green pressure dressing, right?
Mhm.
Do you remember how they used to train us? That is for you and you alone.
Right.
You cannot put that on anybody else. Well, that becomes muscle memory. Steve's had been blown off. We didn't know where it was. And so I got into an argument with the other soldier about, I was like, well, I can't use mine. That's for me. What if I get injured worse? And he was like, well, what if I get injured? Then I won't have mine. So we ended up had to find like clean towels in this kitchen and tie him off to stop all this blood loss. Like that's crazy.
Right.
And looking back, we're like, that is the dumbest thing that we ever got in an argument about. And then after, the wars went on a little bit more, everybody, we were all strapped. I carried 5 tourniquets at all time while I was in Ramadi. I had 3 Israeli pressure dressings on me at all times. I still carry all that stuff.
Mhm.
Just because you never know. I'm like, slap a tourniquet on it. You see a car wreck or something. So it's just, it's just embedded in me now. And that becomes muscle memory. So if you're not willing to adapt to the times, you're going to fail. And so I'm really glad that the military now is looking at LISCO, which is large scale combat operations. And the future is AI. It's drone warfare. Like we're seeing it in Ukraine.
Mhm.
And then we have all this robotics stuff. So yeah, is that the future of warfare? Absolutely. We need to lean into that. Does it scare the hell out of me? Oh my God, yes. I used to think Terminator was like a science fiction movie. Now I'm wondering if it was actually just a warning for us, you know? And maybe that's how like the human race gets, united once more, like we did after 9/11 is suddenly we start fighting Skynet or Palantir.
It's
So,
interesting. It's interesting. My wife made a similar comment recently. We were watching Idiocracy, and she's like,
oh my God,
"Is
I
this
love it.
more of a
That's where
warning?"
we live at right now. I mean, when they had the UFC fight on the White House front lawn, all I could picture was President Camacho rolling out,
Oh
because he's a former WWE champion. And
yeah. Ben, this has been just a great conversation, brother. I guess the final thing I'll say: what advice do you have for service members, veterans who want to write? Like, what would you tell them about your experiences, and could you give them encouragement? Could you give them any pointers? I
yeah,
wish more of our generation would write.
I do. So this will be somewhat long. I'll keep it short
No, that's cool.
though. So I believe that most veterans want to tell their stories.
Mhm.
I think it burns inside of us. I know when I came back, I wanted to, but then I shut down because, when you're in those environments, um, you don't know how to convey things that are morally reprehensible or grotesque in a way that doesn't make you look crazy. Like I remember laughing about running over dogs or surgeon's head exploding, and the civilian populace is so far removed from that. They're just kind of like, they do that fake smile or whatever. And so it shuts us down. We can read body language real well, but I do believe that they want to hear our stories. They just don't know how to respond. And we want to tell our stories. And so when I initially wrote that article that I referenced, I hit a little bit of writer's block afterwards, and I went to my editor at Medium, and I said, "Hey, what do you want me to write on?" I said, like what's tickling your fancy right now? And she said, "Oh man, we loved your war stuff." And Medium's a pretty left leaning publication. I was like, "That's freaking weird. Your staff likes my war stuff? Tell me why."
Mhm.
And I was like, because I don't write on that. That was like a one-off. And she said, oh, well, that's a travesty. She said, you realize that like less than 1% of the entire population is served in the military. And I was like, yeah. And she's like, we're losing all these stories that we need to hear to the annals of history because you guys won't talk about it. She's like, we need to know about the humanity, the barbarity, and the complexity of these combat scenarios so that we can understand humanity better and understand our fellow humans better. And she said, it's just a shame that we're going to lose those stories when more of them need to be told. And I think what happens is people go, oh, well, all the war stories have been told already. And I want to go, really? How many science fiction and fantasy novels, how many romance novels come out every day?
Uh-huh.
And it's the same stuff, you know? And yet we only have a couple military books come out per year, maybe.
Yeah.
One or two.
Yeah.
And so you're going to find that it's completely therapeutic. It's cathartic. It's really good for you. It's a way to get your story down on paper as opposed to like having put it in front of another person. And you're probably going to need help with it. And so luckily, because I realized this, I went into business with one of the Marine Corps commanders that I was with, Major Scott Husing, and we run a company now called Solid Copy Media. You can Google that, Solid Copy Media or solidcopymedia.com. And we help military veterans, first responders, and government executives, those one percenters. We take them from soup to nuts, like how to write a story. Oh, I have an idea for a story. Well, how do I get it down on paper? How do I go through the editing process? How do I create a story arc, a character arc? How do I query an agent? How do I reach out to publishing houses? How do I do marketing? Like we take you through it all. And we did it because we wanted to serve our tribe and teach them how to write their stories because there's just not enough of them out there. And I think more of us should be writing those stories and more of us should be putting them out there. So that's my advice to you.
Awesome. So for our viewers, I will link solidcopymedia.com, and I will also link Ben's outstanding book, Where Cowards Go to Die, so that you guys can check that out. I can't recommend it enough. Ben, thank you so much for taking time out from family to be with us today. I found the conversation to be everything that I hoped it would be. It was great. And best of luck to you,
Thanks,
brother.
John Mark.
Thanks.
I
Best of luck to you,
appreciate it.
brother. Thanks for everything you do for our community.
Honored to be here. Thanks for having me on, John Mark.
Yes, sir. Okay. Bye.